Hello, class. Welcome to another lecture. This time we'll be talking about evidence for evolution. So a lot of this actually is things that we have already talked about. And so some of it will be review, but it's always good to review. And also we'll touch on exactly how it is evidence for evolution, for the theory of evolution and how it proves. So let's start with our fossils and our anatomy. So again, this is some review, but it's still some good things to know. So this is evidence for evolution because structures show there was a common ancestor. So just as a quick reminder, if it's an underline, it's really important and something I'd like you guys to make sure you have in your own notes. Other times, if it's not underlined, it's already in your notes or something that's just some more information to help learn. But definitely pay attention to the things that are underlined. So evidence for evolution, fossils and anatomy are evidence for evolution because there is a similar structure that shows there was a common ancestor. We can look at this evolution of a whale and notice that there are legs on this pachytus, and as it evolves, it loses its the length of its legs and becomes much longer. So we can still see its legs all the way through. This is the vestigial structure that we talked about when we were talking about anatomy. It still has its two legs, but now it looks more like a whale skeleton than it did way back when. Um, Remember that structure determines function. That's really important when we're talking about understanding how animals used to look and used to work, especially in fossils. Fossils give us like a time shot or a snapshot, I should say, of what things looked like at that time. So our structure of the fossils can, oh, here we go. Fossils show a timestamp of how organisms have changed over time. So it's super important that we understand the way we can use fossils and dating of the rock around it to determine what was around at that time and what how things have changed. Remember also that we have homologous structures, which are similar structures which have evolved from a common ancestor. So our example earlier was we had a form of a human, a cat, a bat, and a whale, which all had one larger bone, or humerus, going into two smaller ones, the radius and the ulna, and then a wrist and a bunch of fingers. Now the fingers length varied, but everything else was the same. And not everything else, but it was very similar. It wasn't the same, it was similar. Then we have a vestigial structure, which is a structure that has lost all or most of its original function. I just pointed out those legs that we just saw on the whale on the slide below is a great example. Those legs are still there. It still has the bones to have legs, just no actual use for them. So these can show or prove evolution because it, excuse me, so this can prove evolution because we can see a change in the structure over time. Okay, our next way that, or our next bit of evidence for the theory of evolution is embryology. Embryology. Of course, let's start by defining our words. It's always great to define things. Embryology is the study of the development of unborn or unhatched organisms. So anytime we see ology, it's always the study of something, and it's usually the study of the first part of the word. So embryos are unborn or unhatched organisms. So we have, this is important in terms of evolution because things, or sorry, let me backtrack. Embryology looks at things like formation, structure, and function of each embryo inside. So we have some good examples of different ones. We have a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, a chick, a rabbit, and a human. So they all start looking pretty similar as worm-looking things. And then as they develop, they start to look a little bit more like themselves, especially the fish and the salamander. But really, a tortoise, which looks very different from a human once fully grown, is really similar to a human, which is also similar to a rabbit and a chick. So very different things are still looking very similar uh, after being developed for a little bit. And um, still, I see a lot of similarities in this. We have tails in each one of them. Even the human has a little bit of a bump. We have a large head, um, kind of curled up in a little fetal position. So there are a lot of similarities, but embryology studies how each organism develops, the formation of that development, the structure that they form first, and what they look like, and then the function of each of those. And this is evidence for evolution because similar development shows that there was a common ancestor. If everything from a fish to a man looks the same from the very beginning, it's good evidence that way back when there was a common ancestor that developed that way as well. So we have a few videos of some embryos developing. Let's see if we can speed them up just a little bit. So we can see our two cells coming together to form a zygote. We will learn about this later, but this just kind of shows the process in which happens for a zebrafish. So very different than humans, but a zebrafish. So we're starting to form that very first fetal looking thing. We're starting to get into our second phase of having more of a tail and spine until we get to this long fish looking embryo. So that's our fish. Now we have a mouse. So fish and mice look very different, we can agree. Oh, this one even has the music. So this is a little bit later in the development. We can still see it's all curled up. I'm gonna turn that sound off. So slowly it still has this fetal position. It's getting larger and larger. We can start to see maybe some bones being formed, maybe some major organs. We can see an eyeball being formed, and it's still curled up though, looking a lot like our fish did at the very beginning, kind of curled. We can see a tail in there, and then now we can start seeing these feet that we did not see in the fish. So it's a little bit later. This is about the time the fish was straightening out, but the first, you know, 80% or first 3/4 of that development is very similar. So our next one is a human embryo. So this one goes into point detail that we do not need to know. So we are going to make it go a little bit faster. So this is from the very beginning. We just had cells being formed and they're now kind of coming together. Day 18, this is the timeline kind of. So day 18 since the cells came together. Some of you might know it takes about 9 months for a human cell, two human cells to form and then become a baby. So we are still in the first month of that. Again, we have this kind of weird alien looking blob curled up. We see our tail here still. We see it looked a lot like, we look very similar to the mice at this point. We can start seeing little hands and feet just like we did on the mouse. And then we start getting more human-like. We get our head starts to shape and grow until we get our more human-looking idea. But they all start very similarly, and really only in their last little bit do these embryos take form into looking like what they truly are on the outside. All right, our next evidence to support evolution is DNA sequencing. This is a relatively new idea. And let's first again define DNA sequencing. So it's a process to determine the nucleotide sequence. DNA sequences of different organisms are similar, showing that, so if they are similar, it is evidence because similar sequences show there was a common ancestor. So we also have a little evidencing in this picture saying the more similar the DNA is, the more related the species. This is very important and a relatively new thing as our technology for sequencing and finding out DNA sequences improves. We've been able to do much more research into this, but the idea is each one of these letters is a nucleotide. And so if we can take the DNA of a Homo sapien, which is a human, compared to these different kinds of monkeys, we can notice that these black pieces are matching lines throughout. So the more black, the more common DNA there is. And so we can see a lot of similarities in the same parts of this DNA sequence, which helps prove that we have evolved from monkeys on top of our other ways that we can use, such as the embryology. Our anatomy is very similar, and even some of the fossils that we've been able to find of Homo sapiens when they were first split to be a new species can be found. So very interesting. It's very complicated, and we're going to learn a little bit about it more, but I thought I would introduce it now. And then our last way is artificial selection. So artificial selection, again, let's define it, is a process of breeding organisms for desirable traits. Our examples that are very common in this is dogs, a lot of different vegetables, and chickens. So for dogs, we will artificially select the breeds that we want. So maybe we want a dog that is hypoallergenic, meaning that if someone has allergies to it, the meaning someone who usually is allergic to dogs will not be allergic to this kind. So we might breed that with a dog that maybe is really pretty, like a border collie or whatever we like, so that we can have a hypoallergenic border collie. So that maybe our family won't get allergies when it's in the house. Vegetables are the same way. If we want to maybe have something that produces more more peas or more corn kernels or whatever. And the important thing though is artificial selection can be very harmful. It can cause health problems in animals such as diabetes, heart problems, and even a smaller brain. And it can also build a resistance. So we've done artificial selection for things like antibacterial medicine, which is kind of like if you get sick, you take this medicine called antibacterial, and it makes you better. But sometimes we have accidentally made stronger strains of the flu or sickness because we have been using certain drugs. And if we don't kill all of them, then the ones that are still around after we kill off most of the weak ones are the strongest, so they become more resistant. So just our final quick review for our evidence of evolutions. We have 5 main ways. We have fossil records and anatomy, embryology, DNA sequencing, and artificial selection. I apologize. I said 5 main ways. We only have 4. So these are our 4 main ways. I hope that was clear. If you have any questions about the video, please let me know.